You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to RX Radio. Um, I always say it's a special guest or things like that, but Stu, I just like you more than most people, so it's a really special guest today. Uh,
Super special guest.
yeah, the most special guest, Stuart Locke. Stu, decorated powerlifter, successful business owner, fast car driver, and the head of strength sports here at Prescript.
Yeah.
How you doing, Stu? I don't know.
Good.
How's that intro?
Dude, it was pretty good. You forgot the most handsome person you know, but outside of that, good.
Yeah. The thing is, like, yes, you are the most handsome person I know, of course. But the thing I forget about in between times that I see you is just how large you are. It's so hard for me to comprehend. And like the last time I saw you, it kind of fucked with me because now that your legs are not as big as they were, your upper body just carries the mass of your legs now.
Yeah, dude, I got the Johnny Bravo physique. And then the best part too is, and you probably know this well doing Olympic lifting, is like when you don't do one of the lifts, you have way more output on the other ones because there's way better recovery.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Especially something as taxing as like hinging and squatting. Like that's a lot of fatigue that you're not incurring that you can spread amongst other things now. And it shows.
Yeah. And I'm squatting now, but I think like my nervous system doesn't forget what actual heavy weight is. So even if I squat like 315 for 10, it's not, that's 45%.
That's wild. Let's I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, do you mind giving us kind of a rundown of what the last year has been like for you in terms of training and competing?
Yeah. Okay. So May 26th, 2024, the day after Jim's birthday, it was her birthday present, I had a bilateral patellar tendon rupture. And then I also ruptured my medial and lateral retinaculum on both knees. And then I also tore pretty much all of my hip flexors in my left leg.
That's pretty wild. And that was with what, about 800 pounds on your shoulders?
Dude, I fucking wish. It was 733. I got it like most of the way up, and then the right tendon went. And then because I didn't have an extensor mechanism, that hamstring fired super hard and the foot came off the ground. And then shit rolls downhill. And then I had 733 pounds through that other patellar tendon at an assisty squat. So
Brutal, man.
it was good. It was good.
Yeah, it was good. That had to be one of the one of the most frightening lifting videos I've seen, mostly because you're so handsome and I love you. But like just seeing one thing go wrong and then like it kind of cascade into the next, like fuck, man. That's probably worst case scenario. Like in terms of lifting, lifting is a pretty safe sport to pursue. Like, yeah, everyone's broken and they fuck themselves up, but it's usually a slow like mechanism of injury. That's over years. Like they're nagging things. When it's acute like that, it doesn't get much worse than that.
No, and the best part too was when it happened, I didn't like really realize that the right patellar tendon had been ruptured. And I thought that I broke my left kneecap. I was like, oh, I don't have an extensor mechanism on my left side because I thought that my kneecap had split in half. No. So Jem cut my right knee sleeve off because I was like, dude, my right leg feels fine. Like it feels a little funny, but it feels fine. And then she cut my right knee sleeve off and then my kneecap just like slid onto the side of my leg.
Oof.
And she's like, oh yeah, it's great. It's fine. Don't worry about
it. Just blatantly lying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fuck, man. All right. So that's a pretty wild injury to happen. But you also just mentioned that now you're squatting 315 for sets of 10 less than a year later. So
yeah. And so it's like, it's been a pretty like quick work back up because I think like your nervous system doesn't forget those loads. And I'm obviously not free squatting, like I'm squatting to a box. And it obviously still kind of feels sketchy and shitty because I have patella baja on my left leg. So it doesn't feel great, but like if I warm up my adductors a ton and warm up my hamstrings a ton, and then I squat in flats, like it's workable. Like it's never going to feel normal, but it's workable.
Yeah, no, that's wild. And nothing gets me better than your brand of motivation. If you guys don't follow Stu, like you need to follow Stu. Like, people getting upset because there's like added sugar in their triple latte from Starbucks, and then Stu just accidentally smoking meth on the weekends.
Well, first off, it wasn't. I didn't smoke it. I
Oh,
was
sorry,
sold
my
it.
bad.
So, okay, I'm not a fucking drug addict.
I know, right. Of course not. That's why I said accidentally.
Exactly. Yeah.
No. All right, it's fucked up. But what I'm getting at is like, I don't know, seeing you kind of work your way through from like a pretty insane injury to a year later, like still squatting, still at it, still powerlifting to the best of your abilities, which is still better than most people will ever be.
Yeah.
But just to see that like that comeback over time and like see the way that you look at like people's mindset towards the small minor things that inconvenience them and they look at as major things. And it's interesting to me to see someone that's like gone through what you've gone through and is still as committed as you are to powerlifting and to coaching the way that you do. And just to like take that perspective and put other people's problems into perspective kind of against that. I
Yeah. Well,
love to
it's
see it.
interesting, right? Like, I think if you're sufficiently dedicated, I don't think anything is an obstacle, and I think a lot of people. Actually, this conversation was generally like last week. A lot of people don't want to admit that they just don't like it anymore. It's
Yeah.
like, I just don't like this enough anymore to do it. In actuality, like, if someone were to leave a sport or to leave coaching or whatever, like, when someone's like, yeah, I just don't really want to do this anymore, that's probably the best reason possible. It's like, yeah, your life's short. Don't do things you don't want to do.
Yeah.
But when they start to manufacture these little problems into larger problems that they are, and then use that as justification for X or Y or Z, it's like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. It's like, at the root, you just don't want to do it. And that's
Mhm.
okay. And there's no shame in saying that you don't want to do it. But don't lie to yourself, right? Like, I have a client, I think he's 27 now. He was an Army Ranger. He got blown up at an IED. His L3, L4, L5 is in a cage. And then they found out when they were doing all the MRIs on his back that he had testicular cancer. And so they removed one of his testicles. And he was like 23. So they removed one of his testicles. And then after that, I think he gets deployed again and then gets shot in the shoulder and separates his pec tendon.
Fuck.
And then comes back from that now, like, and he benches like almost 500 pounds now.
Yo.
But
Dude's
for
a
him,
legend.
right, it's like, and then he had he had a misdiagnosis. He was diagnosed with high hamstring tendinopathy. Turns out he had a torn hip labrum, and he squatted like 640 pounds on a torn hip labrum, and he was just like, "Yeah, I'm just in pain. That's fine."
Yeah.
Because for him, he wants to do it. But then I have other clients who will like, they're like, "Oh, I think this is going on. I think this is going on." I was like, "Okay, we'll go get imaging. Like, if we have imaging or a diagnosis, we can work through it."
Yeah.
And then it's always a reason why. And it's like, you can just say you don't want to do it. And in actuality, I don't really want to coach people who don't want to do it. So this is actually better for both of us. Just tell the truth.
Yeah. No, I love it. And there's a good distinction there because like I've been committed to strength training for, I don't know, 2 consecutive decades now. And I'm still not very strong, but I like the pursuit of it. And there's things that like I've squatted through knee pain, I've deadlifted, I've cleaned through back pain, I've snatched through shoulder pain. Like it's all been there. But there's like things I'm not willing to put myself in pain to do. Like I have a fucked up right labrum in my shoulder, and like I'm not willing to go play catch with a football because that fucks up my shoulder. And there's no pursuit of something I'm passionate about with it, right? I'm just gonna fuck up my shoulder. I'm gonna feel pain for something that is relatively meaningless to me. But if I fucking tear the shit out of my labrum snatching, I'm like, yeah, well, at least I was snatching, and hopefully it was a heavy weight. So there is that kind of caveat of like, yeah, like if you love it, you'll push through the pain, you'll do the things you have to do to continue to do it. But if you don't, you're probably not going to. If there's no purpose or meaning in it for you, then you're probably just going to shy away from the things that get difficult or get hard.
Yeah. And I mean, that speaks to kind of like a deeper purpose behind life, right? Like, I think, like you wrestled in college. And I think what performing in high level athletic kind of teaches you is that, like, unless you're really trying and striving towards something that's like super, super difficult and potentially unattainable, I don't think you actually really know what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And the people end up with these like self-limiting beliefs, right? And how many times have you seen it in clinic, right? Like people will be like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do that. Like, oh, I have this problem. And then you like run through all the diagnostics and you're like, you're actually fine.
Yeah.
But so strongly, they've identified with these problems that they're like, well, this is just how it is. And it's like, no. And then, like I can't tell you how many times like I played a rugby game fucked up or played a football game with a concussion. And it's just like, because I understood like in order to accomplish something that was potentially unattainable, like it's going to require an inherent amount of suffering.
Yeah.
There's no way it doesn't, right? There's no injury free or there's no pain free peak performance or attaining something incredible.
Yeah.
And it's just so many people, right? They try to bubble wrap their training in order to hopefully avoid that. And it's like, yeah, it's not going to fucking work, dude. Because guess what? Like you can have perfect squat form every time, and then you still could tear your quad. That's the potential.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the thing also is that performance inherently isn't healthy, right? If we look at performance on a bell curve distribution, there's going to be kind of like a portion of strength training and just overall just exercise that is healthy. But once you start to push it further and further towards performance, you're leaving healthy to pursue something greater than that, to pursue something more that is hopefully more meaningful to you than that. And when you're pushing that level of output, like some of the people I'm sure that you're working with are lifting close to as much weight as humans have lifted, if not the most, right? So that's a pretty insane feat. And there's nothing healthy about that. That's inherently highly risky. And that's something that if you want to put yourself in position to do those things, like you have to endure. And not to mention, like you have to be smart about what you're doing and probably genetically better than other people to be able to pursue this to that end. Like not everyone's going to be able to do this, but even if you do choose to do it, you're choosing to forego that this is healthy. Like you're okay accepting that, no, we're past the point of health. Like this is probably detrimental at a certain point, and I'm going to continue to pursue it because this thing is more important to me than actually being healthy.
Yeah. And it was that kind of reminds me. So like I knew for like probably 2 weeks before that meet that like something was going to happen. Like I was certain of it. And I had surmised that it was probably, I was either going to tear, like, because I'm having like kind of like tricep tendon issues on my non-dominant arm. And like things just felt funny. And I was like, okay. And I was like, it's either going to be my knees because my knees have always been a problem, or it's going to be my tricep.
Yeah.
And I remember I sat Jem down the day before the meet and I told her, I was like, I have a really, really bad feeling about tomorrow. And I think that it's either going to be my knees or my tricep. But I just need to tell you because I can't hold this in anymore.
Yeah.
And she's like, you know what? It's just nerves, blah, 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 blah. And then warming up, or I got up that morning and I was like the most anxious I've ever been. And I was like, fuck. And then I like went, because I woke up at like 4:30 in the morning because I was just like so anxious. And I went outside, I watched the sunrise, and I was like, you know what? Whatever's going to happen today is going to be fine. If I get hurt, that's fine. I'll deal with it. That's a later issue. And then it happened, and I was like, holy fuck. But then the thing that I kind of realized in that moment was like, I got into it to try to find the limit, and I found the limit. And now it's a very easy thing to put to rest. It's like, okay, well, there's nothing left to do. I found the literal physical limit of my body.
That's a great way to look at it. And there's got to be a lot of closure in that too. It's like you've taken this literally as far as you can. And now you're at a point where it's like, all right, there's a very real limitation to continuing to push this. So you can kind of move on with that chapter.
And the thing too is like, I've been, it's a weird way to phrase it, but I've been very grateful given that like every sport that I've had has kind of had like aside from rugby has kind of had like a traumatic end. Like I had to stop playing football because I had a TBI and I had second impact syndrome. So it's like, yeah, you can't do that anymore. Your brain's mush. But then it's like, okay, I did it till the fucking wheels came off and now I can move on. And I didn't, once that happened, I was like, okay, well, there's literally nothing I can do, so may as well do something else.
Yeah. That's crazy. Do you think that, because I wouldn't call them like premonitions, but I have like feelings like that at certain points when training. I'm like, fuck, if I continue to push this, like something's going to go. And sometimes like competition, like, yeah, I'm sure it's worth it. But in training, sometimes it's not. So do you attribute that to wisdom? Do you attribute that to like just kinesthetic awareness? Like what was so prominent about this time that you knew something was going to happen?
Um, Primarily, like in training leading up, I felt, and you know this going into a meet too, like there's meets that you're prepared for and you feel very fit and you feel resilient and you feel strong.
Mhm.
And then there's meets that you prepare for where like you're maybe starting from like kind of starting off the back foot and you're like, yeah, I'm strong, but I don't feel great.
Right.
And that whole prep, like at 6 weeks out, like, because I broke my back in 2018, like sometimes I'll get pretty bad disc irritation on that side. And so like my left leg was fucked. And so I had to take like 3 weeks off of any real lower body aside from like leg extension, leg curl, goblet squats. Like I was pretty fucked up. And so I only had like 3 heavy squats leading into the meet, which was like, I think I did 660 for 2, 705 for 1, and then I did 725 for 1. But I knew that I was like, I have no base to recover from this work. I feel strong, but I feel fragile, and my body just like wasn't good. Like it was definitely the strongest I've ever been, but it's also like my last heavy deadlift I tore my lat, and I was like, this is like something's here,
Yeah.
and I think it was just that that coupled with the fact that like I was getting closer to my goal, and you know how it is too. Like when you get close to trying to accomplish something that you set out, many years ago, there's a degree of inherent anxiety. So I just kind of pushed it down. I was like, "You're just being a fucking pussy. Like, just shut the fuck up."
Yeah.
And it just got like more and more apparent the closer I got. And I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like I'm not going to not do the meet. And people were like, "Would you do it again?" And I was like, honestly, yes. Because the reality is like, yeah, it took me whatever it is, like I'm 9 months post-op now. So it took me 9 months to get back to what I would consider like 85% function.
Mhm.
But had I not had that happen, I would have kept chasing that goal. And you know how it is. When you are chasing something that's like probably on the borderline of what your body's capable of, like there's a degree of inherent selfishness that occurs. Right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
you have to do your training sessions when you do your training sessions. Sometimes they're 3 hours long. Sometimes, it's a Saturday and you've set up reservations that night to go out for dinner and you're too fucked up after training. Right. And so, a lot of that stuff, like a lot of that stuff is just a precondition. And the older I got, the less I was willing to make that concession.
Yes. Yeah.
Because when you're 24, you're like, I don't fucking care. I'm at the gym 70 hours a week anyways doing personal training. If I spend 3 hours to work out in between clients, it doesn't fucking matter. No one's coming to personal training between 1 and 4 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the lifestyle right there.
Yeah. And then when it happened, I was 30. I'm married. We moved to a new country. We're looking to have kids. And it was like, I'd only planned out 2 more meets. I was like, okay, I could probably hit 1940, 1950 at this meet, just crack over 2K at the next one, then I'm done. Like my last meet was supposed to be December 7th, 2024. And this is supposed to be my second last meet. So I was like, yeah, whatever. Like strongest I ever was, highest training total I ever had. And now it's really nice because I'm like, I can just focus on my business. I can focus on my clients. I can focus on my marriage. And I can focus on actually like enjoying life because for many years I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of came to this realization not in the same like traumatic like event way as you did. It was more so like internalized. Like I'm not making the progress in other areas of my life that I want to be making because of the selfish goals I have that are based around strength training and fitness and working out and competing in these sports. So it was more so like I'm just miserable because I'm not where I want to be in business, in my personal relationships, and like in my even emotional development because I'm just putting too much energy and time towards this one thing that there's very little reward to. Like, and that's not completely true, because a lot of the things that I do today, like even professionally and personally, revolve around like training in the gym, and I've met some great people, and there's a lot of great that has come from that. But like the selfish pursuit in itself, to me, it just didn't have the direct reward in the areas that I wanted to see progress in life. And like, yeah, it would have been cool to be better at these things, but like, I don't know. There was a point where I just realized like I'm not genetically gifted enough or willing to do the things that it's going to take to get to the next level at this point. So it's going to be more beneficial for me in my life and the things that I do have control over to stop pursuing this to the extent that I am, and start to put that energy into other areas. And then you start to see those other things start to kind of flourish and grow in the way that you want. You're like, oh, this is totally worth it. Because if I would have kept pursuing like weightlifting or CrossFit or whatever it is, like, okay, like maybe I get a couple more medals, maybe I have a higher total, but then I'm still, the amount of time it took to pursue that and energy, like I'm that much further behind in all these other areas of development.
Well, and I think the other thing too is like, we run, like I had been running a continual cost benefit analysis from the time that I was 25 or 26. I was like,
That's great.
you know
That's
what?
very
Like I
mature.
probably have the potential to do this, but like this is getting more and more strenuous. And I think the other thing too is like, I think some people want that like storybook end, right? They're like, oh, I'm gonna go out on top and I'm gonna retire and I'm gonna be happy with it. And at the end of the day, like I had this conversation with a friend who is now since stepped away from powerlifting, and I was like, you're not going to care in 30 years what your highest total in the meet was. You're not going to care in probably 5 years what your highest total in the meet was. But you are probably going to kick yourself in the ass if you continue to go down this road. You are probably going to kick yourself in the ass that you sacrifice business opportunities, that you sacrifice time with your family, that you sacrificed growing your life that you have to live in for the rest of your life at expense of this. And every single time I've seen someone make the decision to continue in spite of growing their life, I have never, ever, ever seen someone end up in a better position because of it. I've seen plenty of the opposite.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and I think the other thing too is like people want to achieve some level of significance in a sport because of social capital. It's not any other reason than like it's inflating to the ego and it feels better to be like, I'm really good at this one thing. And it's like maybe the thing that you're going to be really good at has nothing to do with sports.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, people form their identity around that too, because especially now, like powerlifting, weightlifting, strength sports, bodybuilding, all these things, like the competition is, yes, it's on the platform, but it's kind of on the internet as well. Like they're very much like ESPN's not covering these things. So it's like very much that instant gratification of, all right, I'm going to do this lift and then I'm going to post it. And then I'm going to get that instant gratification of like likes and shares and people like pumping me up and like inflating my ego because of it. And I think that's, I mean, you could probably tell me better. You can probably explain this better than I can because of how involved you are in coaching, and you've probably seen, I don't know. I think like on my radar, powerlifting probably came on the scene for someone that's not a powerlifter, like as a more prevalent like identity, probably maybe around 2010 to 2015. Like there was probably a peak in like a growing popularity of it. And now it's kind of, it seems to me as if it's leveled out, but there's like a changing in the type of people that pursue it, or the type of people that get into it. There's like this younger generation kind of coming into it now. And I think a lot of them are coming into it for exactly what you're saying, like that social capital, or that recognition, that kind of ego stroke that comes with it. And the more that draws you into it, it seems like those people identify more based off of that. Does that sound true?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. And then the other thing too, and the thought experiment that I posed to these people who are so wrapped up in it, I'm like, let's say your next meet, what happens to you happened to me, and your entire identity is formed around this. What do you do?
Yeah.
You're just gonna fucking kill yourself because you can't squat anymore. That's your fucking outcome. That's your solution. It's like, so you have to build a life that's a little bit more holistic than like I spend 4 hours in the gym 4 times a week, and everything I do is devoted to like reading about it and talking about it and buying equipment for it. And it's just like, dude, like this is a season in your life. This is not your entire life. And I understand being dedicated to something, but the other half of that is like, you have to have other hobbies outside of it. And I'm sure something you've noticed as well. In actuality, the people that are the best, paradoxically, are the people that care the least.
Yeah, I've seen that in a lot of ways, and I wouldn't even say that they care the least, but they have an identity and a life outside of the sport, right? Like they're able to separate those two things. Like they're the people that I've noticed that are just high performers. They're high performers in everything that they do, right? They're not just good at one thing and they neglect everything else in their life. They're good at that one thing, but they're good at that one thing because it's a result of the way that they perceive that and the way that they make decisions around the things that are important to them and their goals. And that results in them being a high performer in a lot of different areas. Like yourself, like I'm interested to get your take on this because it seems to me like in this time, like you great powerlifter, you've put up incredible totals, but since you've been out of powerlifting competitively for this last year, it seems like your business is flourishing now. And do you think there's a correlation between that to your experience over the last year and being, forced to hang up the belt in terms of powerlifting to now being like, all right, I'm going to focus on performing in other areas. And have you seen that be a positive reflection in your business?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, like there's only so much mental effort or energy you have in a given 24-hour period. And for me, like so much of it was wrapped up in like, after a heavy squat session, like I'm kind of fucking useless.
Yeah.
And it just, once that stimulus was gone, I had this huge amount of excess, I don't know, brain output.
Yeah.
And then I realized I was like, there's all these people who make themselves a job as a powerlifting coach, but it's not a career, it's a job, right? So it's
Love
like,
it. Yeah.
and they're only doing it to be able to pursue the lifting. And that's kind of what I did, right? I was like, by the grace of God, like I've been blessed in the clients that I've had and the growth that I've had without kind of pushing towards it. But now that I'm actually doubling down on it and I've been doing continuing education in that regard, I'm like, oh, this is the exact same output, just in another direction, just in another way. And a lot of the same things that I learned through football and I learned through rugby and then I learned through powerlifting, it's like, it's all the same kind of transference of stuff, which is like, you're going to have to do things when you don't want to do them. You're going to have to do things that you're uncomfortable with, and you're going to have to do it for a much longer time than you would expect. And you're probably not going to have immediate rewards.
Yeah.
And I think, and you can probably speak to this because you're dating Corey, but I honestly think that bodybuilders are way better business owners than any people in strength sports.
Man, I tell Corey this all the time because she impresses me so much because she has built an incredible business for herself and she's done it by herself. Like she has one person working for her and she has made it so efficient. Like it's such an efficient, like well-oiled machine that she just has these systems in place. And like it's funny because she'll like have calls with clients or like she'll have check-ins and things and she'll get upset when it takes like more time than she predicted that it'll take because that's how efficient it is. She can predict like this will take this much time. And if it takes more than that, then she's like, all right, I need to find a way to make this more efficient next time. And it's very impressive for me to see. And the work ethic that kind of comes with that, it does transfer. It's a very lateral application to like the discipline and the decision-making process that it takes to pursue something like bodybuilding that is very meticulous. It's like, yes, you have to focus on every single one of the details and the timing and the diet and like the supplementation and hydration and like everything is in check, but like that laterally transfers to her business. So and we've had the conversation too, is like, she hasn't competed in a few years and she's like, it's hard for me to step away from the development in my business to dedicate that bandwidth to competing. So it's like it's very much what you said is there's only so much bandwidth, mental capacity you have within a day. And she understands like if I want to continue to compete, I have to make my business run very efficiently to be able to not see a decrease in the product that I'm delivering as I pursue this thing that's going to take up a lot of mental energy.
Well, and I think the last part too is like, you said it's very meticulous, it's very detail oriented, but the other half of it is like really like outside of your training sessions and powerlifting, like the only other rules are like make sure you're sleeping somewhat reasonably, and if you're in a weight class restricted athlete, just like don't eat like a dick.
You're right.
You know what I mean? It's like, but it's like a bodybuilder can't like, you're in clinic for 8 hours, you come home and you're like, wow, I haven't really eaten in the last 8 hours. I'm just going to have like a 16-ounce ribeye that I cook in butter. You can't do that. So it's so all encompassing that I think for them, like business comes super, super naturally. And, it's just so funny to see the scalability and also the success of like bodybuilding business owners compared to really any other cohort.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing too about like, I don't know, I see about the bodybuilding population is that because there is so much buy-in to the detail orientation of the process, like people that seek out a coach in that, there's a high level of compliance with that, or at least commitment to that you don't necessarily get in some of the other, strength sports. If we could like lump powerlifting into this, if we can lump weightlifting, or just like strength training in general, it's a lot of people do in kind of the more strength biased sports. They focus on what they're doing in the gym and nothing else. And it's kind of this, it breeds this mindset of, all right, I need to be doing more. What am I missing? And a lot of times the things that they're missing are things outside of the gym. It's like you don't necessarily need to be doing more because it's a very physically taxing, like neurologically taxing pursuit. The things you need to do are actually outside of the gym. Is like you said, you need to focus on sleeping better. You need to focus on getting your nutrition in check. You need to focus on things that are going to allow you to recover from that stimulus. And a lot of times the things that I'll implement with people that are more in the strength sports is like, you actually need to train less. And I don't know if this is like a product of me getting older, but I only train 4 days a week. And like most people, that's what I recommend to them, even if they are pursuing strength goals. And there's always going to be caveats to that. And like lifestyle is a big factor, but like a lot of people, they're not making their living off of strength sports. Right. So it's like they have a 9 to 5 job or they have a family and kids and they're still pursuing these goals, which is sick. And that's the reality of it. Is like this is a really cool hobby to have that you can still have progress in, even if you have a bunch of other shit going on. But a lot of time the answer isn't to do more in the gym. It's to focus more on allowing yourself to recover from what you're doing in the gym with the things that you're doing outside of the gym.
Yeah. And it's just like, to kind of go more in the business direction too. It's like, I think, like a lot of people don't understand like how holistic actually owning a business is, right? It's like, there's so many moving pieces involved, right? Like, did you get the email this week about how you have to do your BOI report again?
Yeah. Yeah, dude.
Dude, and it's like BOI report, Florida state filing. It's like, I have payroll set up, like all this shit. And it's just like, it's all this like stupid menial shit. And it's like putting stuff into QuickBooks. And it's like, it sucks. But if I was still pursuing powerlifting, like I wouldn't be able to do those things. I would have to outsource them, which cuts into my revenue, which cuts into my bottom line. And it's just, I don't know. I think, and also like, you're never ever like, I've never met someone who like built a really, really big successful business and was like, that was a mistake. It's like they probably like, I made mistakes along the way, but they're like, oh, I really regret making $1 million a year. It's like, no one says that. There's components of it that they probably hated, but it's just so odd. Like I'll talk to these people, even like, I was talking to this guy who's got like a cash-based practice, and he's like, yeah, I just like, I don't want to like come across as like salesy. And I was like, okay, well, like the other half of that is like, do you think that you can help people? He's like, well, yeah. And I was like, do you think that there's a certain amount of treatment necessary to work through an issue, like based on a prognosis? He's like, yes. And I was like, so if you're just telling them what that is, how is that salesy? Like, you have a issue, A is the solution. This is it. And he's like, well, like, what if they can't afford it? I was like, but that's a you thing, not a them thing. You're putting that, you're thinking that, not them. You have no idea.
Right. No, I feel very strongly about that as well, because I'm very lucky in the fact that I get to work with a lot of people that are very good at what they do, like yourself included, like you said, Corey included. Like most of the people like in my circle I consider them to be some of the best in the world at what they do. Right. So I feel very strongly about what you're saying, because there's always going to be someone out there that is not very good at what they do, but they are good at sales. And you see it all the time. You see people like running Instagram ads. And you're like, oh, this guy's a fucking joke, but he's going to get a ton of clients just because he's putting himself out there and telling the world what he does. And that's going to appeal to some people. And they're having a broad reach. Yes. And probably a very mediocre or even trash product. But the reason they're succeeding is because they're putting themselves out there, they're selling themselves, as opposed to people who are really good at what they do. A lot of times there is that kind of disconnect in the quality of service that they offer and the amount of confidence that they have around it, that they almost feel like I feel this sometimes too, is like fixing people's issues has gotten relatively easy for me. Like it's rare that I'm stumped or like there's a situation that I can't at least help someone improve on. But there's a level of guilt almost associated with that sometimes, where it's like, oh, this is so easy for me. Like I shouldn't charge them this much or this or that. And it's like, well, if you think of what's going to happen if that person goes to someone else, they're going to pay a lot more money for a subpar service, and they're probably going to get worse results just because someone else sold them, the dream that you could create for them, and you could do it probably better than anyone else. But if you kind of equate the price tag on those things, like if someone goes the typical like PT, whatever rehab route, they might have very mediocre results after 8-16 weeks. And then hopefully their insurance covers it. If not, then they're paying out of pocket for that. But there's going to be a certain point where they get good enough that their insurance isn't going to cover it. And then they're left kind of like holding the bag. Like, what the fuck do I do now? Like they have to pay out of pocket for, someone else that's probably going to do just as mediocre of a job. When in reality, if they would have just paid you in the first place, like, yeah, it might have looked a little bit more expensive up front, but they never would have had this issue again. Or they would have found a long-term solution and they end up paying a lot less in the long term. And I think a lot of people don't think of it that way, but I completely agree with you. It's like, if you're good at what you do, you have to tell people with a level of confidence that you can fix their problems, or else they're just not going to buy into it. And then they're going to buy into something else from someone that offers a worse product than what you do.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So like I made this mistake early on in my coaching career where I was like, because I have very high communication frequency and because I'm pretty invested in all of my clients' lives, even though I have a big roster, I'd hear what other coaches did. And I was like, oh, you do weekly check-ins? How pathetic. You know what I mean? And it's just like this, it's this like pretentiousness. And then the other part of it, it's almost like a moral superiority. It's like, oh, I couldn't believe you'd do that.
Right.
And then I came to realize the longer it went on, and I was like, oh, that's just one, me being a hater. So it is in no way psychologically productive. But the second thing is I had read this thing called The Mathematician's Apologies. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
Okay, so super, super interesting. So essentially, I can't remember who the fuck wrote it, but the idea was he wrote this piece and he was like, no one has ever advanced a field by being a critic. Mm. Right? Like and he was talking specifically about mathematics. He was like, no one who's ever been, a critic of mathematics has ever created a new theorem or solved a long-standing problem that no one could fix, right? None of those people have ever done anything, right? They just sit in the pulpit and they just poo-poo and talk shit.
Yeah.
And he's like, so in actuality, if you have a problem or you're seeing a problem, let's say that the market has shown, the only solution to a bad idea becomes a better idea.
Yes.
So if there's something wrong with it, then just show the solution. Don't waste your time and mental effort on pointing out the people that are bad. And it's always interesting too that the people who do that the most strongly are similarly the ones with the worst running businesses.
Interesting.
It's like, all right, well, you're just like, this is probably a mental exercise for you to feel better about the fact that you're not where you want to be. It's like, oh, I don't do things that way, right? It's like, oh, I'm principled, I'm moral. It's like, okay, you mean moral and miss your car payment. Good luck.
Yeah.
And the other thing that kind of reminds me of is like, do you ever hear the story about like Picasso doing the drawing on the napkin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where it's like, lady's like, oh, can you make me a drawing? And, draws it on the napkin. He's like, oh, it'll be $10,000. And she's like, how? That took you 2 minutes to draw. And he's like, yeah, and it took me 50 years to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that's exactly how I feel about, like I said, the people that you and I get to associate with. They're very good at what they do. And the thing about that is, and this is like in business across all genres, is that you get paid more to solve more complex problems,
Yes.
right? Like if you work for Microsoft, you're going to get paid more to solve a higher level problem than like an entry level like coder or something. Someone's just kind of doing the work that's set out in front of them. And, and that should cross apply to whatever you're doing. Is that the more complex the problem is, like there's a higher price tag to be able to solve that. Or if it is a more simple problem, like even just rehabbing a knee ACL, you should be paid more to do that more quickly, right? Because time is a very valuable resource as well. And that's something, if you can get someone results faster, or if you can get better results in the same amount of time, then there should be a higher premium on that than there is someone who does it kind of, just kind of base minimal, like, okay, we got range of motion back in 12 weeks. We got strength within a reasonable amount within 16, and, kind of checking boxes as you go. So I think that's a really important part to realize of all this, anyone that's listening and is running a business, is that the better you are at solving these problems, if you could solve them faster, or you can get a better result in the same amount of time, like, that inherently makes your service more valuable than the next person.
Yeah. And it's, something that I really struggled with, especially when I went and started in-person personal training, was I kind of did this like moral superiority thing where it's like, well, if I do my job in the first year, like they shouldn't need to renew. And it's like, yeah, that's a fine prospect, but 90% of your clients are never going to go to the gym without you. They know how to do it,
Yeah.
but they're never going to go to the gym without you. And in actuality,
Mm-hmm.
if you're uncomfortable with the renewal process, then you just don't have a sustainable business. And then you have huge fluctuations month to month and year in your revenue. And it's like, how's that for building a life? And
Yeah.
so, like, so many people are just so consumed with this, like, this moralistic, like, they feel bad about making money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, I remember I had a guy, he came, because when it comes to like the subset of powerlifting coaching, like I'm one of the most expensive in the world. And this guy come to me, he's like, well, how do you justify that price? And I was like, well, I mean, you've seen my clients, I don't have to. And I was like, I can tell
Yeah.
you the services that are provided. And I was like, but I don't have to. Like, here's my lifters. This is what they've done. This is where they started. This is where I got them to. And if that's not something that you can reasonably put in your monthly budget, that's okay. But if it is, like, I'm not going to justify this to you. Like, the price is the price, and I have enough leads coming in that I don't need to try to sell everyone that asks about it.
Yeah. And that's huge. And that's a big thing that I believe in too, is once you reach a certain level in your business, like you should never devalue your service, right? People, like, there's a price tag on it, and then there's the value that you offer. And someone like yourself, I think that there's an immense amount of value, and the price tag probably doesn't even equate to that. Like, you're probably charging less than your actual value in the space, but there is the part, the practicality of it, where you have to run a business, and there's that trade-off of time, dollar amount per unit time. Yes, all of this has to make sense on your side of things. And it is the type of thing that if you have the right clientele, yes, there are going to be people that charge a ton of money, and they offer maybe a good service, maybe a great service, but it's always being able to equate or communicate the level of value for the service that you're providing. And there's going to be a different kind of cost equation for that, for on the business owner side and on the consumer side. But finding the right kind of value proposition for your clients is a huge part of what you do in terms of business, but it always has to value your time. And that's something I absolutely believe in, is that once you reach a certain level of proficiency in what you do, you should never devalue your time, because what that does to the consumer is it devalues your service. They don't put as much importance on what they're doing. And like, for someone that's as good as you, or someone else that's on that level in what they're doing, it should be something where people have to kind of make a consideration of how important is this to me. And it shouldn't be just kind of like, if you're charging $150 a month, like that doesn't, to them, there should be some sort of emotional process around giving that money to you. And it should be a number where it's like, I have to consider this because it is a sizable amount, or for the service that's being offered compared to whatever else is being offered in the industry. This maybe costs relatively more, but I can justify it because of the level of service or because of the progress that I'm going to get. And they look at it as more of an investment in the service, in themselves, in you, in that relationship. And that needs to be mutually beneficial. Like there needs to be some sort of give on the client side of things where they're like, all right, this maybe is a lot of money and I could get this cheaper somewhere else, but I'm not going to get the level of service. I'm not going to get as much out of this. So I can justify spending this money for a higher level of value that I'm going to get from it.
Well, that's kind of the paradox of price, right? And it's like, as your rates scale and as the price of your product scale, you actually paradoxically end up with less pushback, right? So it's
Absolutely.
like,
Yes.
perfect example. We sell pre-made programs on the website. They're $50. At least once a month, I'll put them on sale for 20% off and send it to the email list. You know what I mean? Like they're not fucking expensive. You can get like 16 weeks of off season and an 8-week prep for like with the sale for like $120, right? It's like fucking 20, you know, 6 months of programming. You can run that conceivably forever. The amount of questions I get about like, well, what do I get for that? What does it look like? Da-da-da. And I'm like, okay. And I was like, I appreciate the interest. I was like, this is what you get. This is a sample of what the first day looks like. And I was like, but the other thing is, I was like, it's a $40 or $50 program.
Yeah.
Like it's honestly not much.
Yeah.
You're not getting much. And, you know, like even when I was starting to scale my rates, I remember I had a conversation with Shallow and he was like, yeah, this is what you should set your rates at. And I was like, okay. And I remember talking to my old fitness manager about it. And I was like, yeah, you know, I'm starting to get some pushback and stuff. And he was like, okay. And he's like, so he's like, because I think at the time my rates were like $250 a month, which is not crazy. And he was like, so it's very rarely, if ever, he's like, if it mattered enough to them, they would do it. Right. And he's like, when you were here in person, he's like, you'd have single moms sign up for personal training and they might be spending $1,000 a month on it. And they might be the sole breadwinner for their home. Mm-hmm. Because it mattered that much to them. So he's like, it's very rarely, if ever, a question of money. It's much more commonly a question of value. And he's like, they're just not seeing the value in what you provide. And he's like, so you just have to explain more and differently and in more depth so that they understand the value of the service. And that was a huge like light bulb moment for me because I was like, oh, this is a breakdown in communication on my end. I need to work on this part better and market better, you know, put stuff out there better so that the questions are answered before they even come to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my question for you then is, now you're at this point where you have this like resume of clients and results that you've gotten. So it's pretty easy to point to that and be like, all right, this is why I'm worth this price tag. What were those conversations like before you had that full resume built out?
Well, I was grateful enough that like I scaled, I think I upped my price every 4 months for like 2 years. But when I started,
Okay.
like before I was in person at Good Life, like I was only charging like $50 a month. And then when I went online and it became my primary thing, I was like 120, and then 160, then 200, then 230, then 275. And then, but those conversations were, and I was very grateful because even by the point that those rates started to scale and I did my first big rate increase, I had already had enough of a body of work by that point that there was no real pushback. And I think like, I actually had this conversation with a buddy. I was like, he's like, well, what advice would you give to someone who's like trying to just like get it up and going? And I was like, you should probably offer a pretty low price point. You should get as many clients as humanly possible, right? Like you should get as many as will work with you. And it's going to be bad at first, which is why the price point isn't high. And then you're going to refine that system. You're going to refine that system. You're going to refine that system. You're going to get better at feedback. You're going to get better at communication. You're going to get better at your systems. And then they're going to get better results. And then you're going to have, with any low price point service, you're going to have a drop off. You're going to have a higher churn. But then you're also going to get these nuggets, right? Like these people who are just killers and are fantastic. And I was like, and then those are the people that you use as your testimonials as you start to scale your rates. And then the beautiful thing too is the people you don't really like are also the first ones to drop off when rates go up.
Yeah.
And like I had a conversation with Jem on the way back from the gym. I was like, I can legitimately say like every client I've signed up since December is a client that I genuinely like and genuinely like communicating with. There's nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, get yourself, essentially like you have to push until your systems break, because you don't
absolutely.
know if something's fucked up until it fucks up.
Yeah. No, I love it. A few things you said there is like the number one thing. I think there's a lot of entitlement in this industry. So like the number one thing I took from that is that show your value before you demand it, right? Like a lot of people, they think they're entitled to a high price point because maybe that's like the average in the industry or whatever it is. But unless you could show that you're worth that price point, you don't deserve it yet. So what you're saying is you need to work for it. You need to show how good you are at this. And then the people that don't appreciate that, they're going to fall off. But the people that do, they're going to pay whatever price you want them to pay within reason, because they respect the value that they're getting from that service. And then the higher that price point goes up, and this is something I've seen in my business as well, is that there's now a mutual respect, because I, as a practitioner, as a coach, whatever hat I'm wearing, I don't respect giving my time to someone at a discount because they're not respecting the value that they're getting from that. So like if it's someone that's at a lower price point, I'm like, oh, fuck, man, I have to deal with this person. Like it's not worth my time. And you kind of get this resentment towards it. But as you get these people that are paying a price that now values your time, there's that mutual respect that you're like, okay, you are willing to pay a higher price point for my time because you see the value in it and you respect that client more. And then there's inherently that respect because they're willing to pay more for the service that you're providing. And I think that's really important for clients that you want to stick around for a long time, and for you to be able to justify putting the amount of effort and kind of emotional commitment into that you need to.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is I think probably 20% of my roster are people that I've had for more than 4 years.
That's incredible.
Right. And what I came to realize is I was like, oh, just like if you give a really, really good service, then they're probably going to stick around anyway. Like Casey and I in September will have been 5 years.
That's wild.
But because like I've evolved as a coach, she's evolved as a lifter. We've continued to do this. And for her, it was never oh, well, it's because in actuality, the value was shown. And for her, it was a very common sense thing to do. But I think, and that's a really, really good signal too, is like, if you start to scale rates and you have a big drop off, it's probably that your service is kind of bad.
Yeah.
And I had a call with a coach from Australia this week, and he's like, yeah, I'm really struggling with churn. He's got like high turnover. I was like, well, what is your communication look like? What do your systems look like? He's like, oh, well, I respond to them like, I'll do my check-ins, like respond to the messages like every like 3 days. What?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I realized I should probably stop doing that because he's like, I wasn't even your client yet, and you were getting back to me faster than I get back to my clients. I was like, yeah. But so many of these people, right? It's like you're struggling with churn. You're probably just not good enough at your job yet, and you're probably not giving a service that they value yet. And by the grace of God, I've been able to build a super sustainable business because service has always been at the forefront, right? And the other thing too is like going to bat for people when they're going through difficult life situations is, I think, another big thing, right? Like I had a guy who, he'd been a client for 2.5 years at the time, and he was transitioning out of his job into personal training. And he was working at the old club that I work at in Canada. And he's like, oh man, I'm gonna have to stop coaching for a couple of months. And I was like, well, listen, like if I have whatever the dollar value was at that point, less coming in for 2 or 3 months, it doesn't really affect my, I have enough clients that that's not really, my MMR has dropped by 2%. And I was like, this is what we'll do. I was like, you're going to keep training. And I was like, I was on the education team. I did all the sales stuff. We're just going to hop on the phone once a week. You're going to keep training as normal. And I'm going to teach you how to sell. And so by the time you start at work, you can just start selling right away and you can get some contracts coming in. You can get some big paychecks. Then we can start back up. And he's still with me.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just like so many people, like yes, money is a nice byproduct of what we do, but at the end of the day, and I think what we do well at Prescript is you're still in the people business. Service-based business is still the people business.
Yes.
You have to help people.
Absolutely. And that should be the takeaway of this entire podcast for everyone that's listening, is that you're in the service industry. Unless you can offer an excellent service, you don't deserve more money, or someone's not going to stay with you because you're not doing what you need them to do. And especially training, it's such an emotional thing. There's such a connection there to so many people. And it is, in this aspect, it's so personal. Like, you have a personal relationship with all these people, especially anyone that's in person. Like, you probably spend more time with the person that you're training 3 times a week than they spend with their outside of immediate family that they live with, like their family, their best friends, like anyone. They're going to tell you everything that's going on, their day to day. You know about their career, you know about their marriage, their kids, you know about the shit that's going on with their friends, you know what they're doing on the weekend. Like, you are a very important part of their day. And if they keep opting into that, you have built a very meaningful relationship with that person. And I'm not saying like you should take advantage of that, but you have to understand that the service you're offering is worth something that's more than just working out to them. Right. So that's something that, if you can provide a high level of service, and if you can create an emotional connection and a genuine emotional connection with these people, they're never going to leave you. Like, I have a similar thing. Like, I have a client that's been with me for 8 years because I helped him a lot at a point where he really needed it and no one else could offer that to him. And I charged next to nothing because it was something that, like, the amount of care he needed, that service would be like anyone charging a reasonable rate. No one could pay that out of pocket. But he was at a point where the medical system had kind of failed, and there wasn't really a clear path forward. And I just told him, I was honest. I'm like, look, I don't know how much I can help you, but I'll do my best for you. And if it keeps working, then we'll keep pursuing it until there's no more progress. And 8 years later, he's still getting better. He's still having progress. He's in a completely different place in his life than he was when I met him. And it's like, that's the type of relationship. Like, you can't fake that. And you can't really put a price tag on that. And even if you were, like, okay, the amount of time I've put into that relationship, it doesn't equate to the dollar amount. Like, I've invested so much more into that than I've made from it. But that's the type of connection that, like, if you can provide that level of service, then you're never going to be needing for money with your clients, right? The money is a byproduct of that connection that you're making and the value that you're providing for them. And a lot of times in this industry, that's like a quality of life for them. You're increasing their quality of life by what you're doing for them. So there's a dollar amount that you could probably put on that that's way more than what they're ever going to pay you, but they at least realize the value in that, and then they'll continue to invest in you no matter what.
Yeah, when it's like, I even think about like one of my clients, like, we sat down, we were having dinner, and I was like asking him about his in-person business, and he was like, oh yeah, he's like, he was telling me he was having a little bit of financial struggles and stuff, and I was like asking about specifics, and then like the bottom line that we came back to, I was like, oh, like you're not doing anything. Like, you give an exceptional service, you're probably the best personal trainer in your city, and you're not doing anything to grow your business, and you don't understand that you've built this gigantic bank account of goodwill where people are like, you're fucking awesome at your job, I love working with you, you've had long-term clients, and you've never asked for any reciprocity.
Yeah.
And that's the other benefit of, being exceptional at service and being exceptional at your job and really taking care of your people, is we literally, in the span of a month, increased his revenue by 70%.
That's
in a
crazy.
month. It'll be a month on Friday by 70%.
Yeah.
And I was like, and because in actuality, you probably don't actually need to be that brilliant of a business person if you're good at building relationships, good at getting people to whatever goals they have, and you're a likable person.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's the thing is like there's an emotional intelligence that kind of comes with the space that if you have it, it shouldn't be hard to do these things. It's not like there's like a rule book to it. It's like if you actually care about what you're doing and who you're doing it with, then the stuff should come relatively natural. It should be relatively intuitive. So it kind of starts with investing in your people, in the people that are going to be investing in you because they're literally taking money out of their pocket and giving it to you. So
Yeah.
if you can treat them in a way that makes them feel like there's a high value to this interaction, then they're going to go to bat for you no matter what.
Yeah. And that could literally be the whole thing. It's just like if you're struggling to get clients, that's either a signal that you're doing literally nothing business related or you suck at your job.
Yeah.
So one of those
Yeah.
two things. It's like A or B. There's nothing else.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I absolutely agree with it. And I think that's a good point to kind of wrap it on is that like just be a decent human, care about your people, give a good level of service. And then once you have that, then focus on the business, building the business in a way that respects your time and a way that respects your value as well. That needs to scale. Cause like you were saying, like you started scaling your prices 5 years ago. And the thing about that is that from right now to 5 years ago, you have 5 more years of experience. Like you've gotten 5 years better at your job. Like even some like, whatever, if you work at a bank, you're probably going to get a 5 to 10% raise year over year just because you've gotten better at doing what you're doing, hopefully gotten better. Even if you haven't, you're probably going to get that raise. Like you have more experience, you've gotten better, you've solved more problems. So your value is going to scale with the time that you're doing this. And especially if you can sustain to do this for an amount of time, 5 years, like you deserve to be charging more because your value is now higher from that experience that you have.
Yeah. And one last point. You have to at minimum increase your rates once a year along with inflation. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
because otherwise you're just
Absolutely.
making less money every year.
Right. Exactly. And that's, especially a lot of trainers, they start this at a pretty young age and they don't understand these types of things, but the longer you're in business, your income should scale with that. You should make more money over time. And you have to make more money over time because your money becomes less valuable over time. So it's like literally unless you want to be sliding backwards in your business, you need to increase your rates. And there's nothing selfish about that. There's nothing that's not genuine about that. Is like you need a certain quality of life to be able to provide a high level of service.
Done.
That's it. Let's wrap it up here and you and I will wrap after. But
Okay.
if people want to reach out to you, whether that's for coaching or for business advice, where can they find you, Stu?
Stu at Kodiak Barbell or Stu _ Kodiak Barbell on Instagram, or you can go to the Kodiak Barbell website. That's it.
Cool. Thanks for tuning in, guys.